You have already noticed something unsettling about the smartest person in most rooms. They rarely command it. The one who speaks the loudest about their credentials, their achievements, their intellectual superiority is almost never the one people truly defer to when decisions matter. There is a silent hierarchy operating beneath every conversation, every meeting, every social gathering, and the people at the top of it never announce themselves. They do not need to. And this is not about intelligence. This is about something far more primal, far more difficult to fake, and infinitely more powerful. The world has sold you a lie about power. It told you that knowledge is power, that being the smartest guarantees you influence. But you have seen the contradiction with your own eyes. You have watched brilliant people get ignored, talked over, dismissed. You have seen average minds command entire organizations. The discrepancy is not accidental. It reveals a truth about human social structures that makes most people deeply uncomfortable. Intelligence without composure is just noise. Brilliance without restraint is desperation wearing a mask. And desperation, no matter how articulate, never sits at the head of the table. There is a reason why the most intelligent people in history often failed to gain power during their lifetimes. Nikola Tesla died alone and broke while Thomas Edison built an empire. Tesla was arguably the superior mind, yet Edison understood something Tesla did not. He understood that human hierarchies are not meritocracies of pure intellect. They are dominant structures masked in the language of reason. Edison knew when to speak and when to let silence do the work. Tesla could not stop explaining, justifying, proving. One behavior signals scarcity, the other signals abundance. You need to understand what quiet dominance actually is, and because it is not what most people think. It is not introversion. It is not shyness or social anxiety dressed up as strategy. Quiet dominance is the controlled withholding of your full capacity in a way that makes others come to you. It is the psychological equivalent of a gravitational field. You do not chase. You do not convince. You create a vacuum of certainty in an ocean of noise, and people fall into it without knowing why. This is not manipulation in the traditional sense. It is alignment with how primate hierarchies have functioned for millions of years. Watch what happens in any group when someone intelligent begins explaining something. If they explain too eagerly, too completely, too quickly, something shifts in the room. People begin to tune out, not because the information is wrong, but because the delivery violates an ancient social contract. Explaining is a submissive behavior when done excessively. It signals that you need the other person to understand, or to validate, to approve. The person who truly holds power does not need you to understand. They can afford your confusion. They know you will come back and ask, and in that return, the hierarchy is reinforced. This is why professors rarely run universities, why researchers rarely become CEOs of the companies built on their discoveries, why the person who knows the most about a subject is rarely the one whose opinion weighs heaviest in the room. And the structure of dominance and the structure of competence are two separate pyramids, and they only occasionally overlap. Most people spend their entire lives climbing the wrong one, wondering why their intelligence never translates to influence. Let me take you inside a specific psychological mechanism. It is called the pratfall effect, but it operates in reverse when intelligence is involved. The pratfall effect shows that highly competent people become more likable when they make small mistakes because it humanizes them. But there is a dark corollary. Highly intelligent people become less influential when they display their intelligence too freely because it triggers threat responses in others. Your brain is designed to neutralize perceived threats. Someone flaunting intellectual superiority is a status threat, and your subconscious immediately begins the process of dismissal, rationalization, and social undermining. You have done this yourself without realizing it. Consider how you feel when someone corrects you in public, even when they are right. The correctness of their statement is irrelevant to your emotional response. What you feel is the status injury, the social demotion. Now imagine someone who is constantly correct, constantly explaining, constantly demonstrating superior knowledge. They might be right 100 times, but your nervous system does not care. It only registers the cumulative status wounds, and it begins to code that person as a threat to be managed, not a leader to be followed. Quiet dominance operates in the opposite direction. It allows people to maintain their ego while still arriving at your conclusion. This is the mechanism of true influence. When you speak less, you create space for others to think they discovered the answer themselves. When you remain composed while others scramble to fill silence, you become the emotional anchor of the room. When you withhold judgment, people begin seeking it. These are not tricks. They are alignments with how social hierarchies self-organize under conditions of uncertainty. History gives us a perfect case study in Joseph Stalin versus Leon Trotsky. Trotsky was the brilliant orator, the intellectual force of the Bolshevik Revolution, the man who organized the Red Army. Stalin was quieter, less flashy, seemingly less gifted. Yet Stalin understood organizational power in a way Trotsky never could. While Trotsky was writing essays and giving speeches, Stalin was quietly placing loyalists in key positions, saying little, promising less, but always there, always watching, always remembering. Trotsky's intelligence was loud. Stalin's dominance was quiet. You know who won. This pattern repeats across every domain. In boardrooms, the person who speaks first and most often is rarely the one whose opinion carries the meeting. In social groups, the person trying hardest to seem interesting is never the most magnetic. In relationships, the person most eager to prove their value has already lost the frame. There is an inverse relationship between the energy you expend trying to establish your position and the security of that position. Desperation is loud, power is quiet. You might be thinking this is cynical, that it devalues genuine intelligence and rewards social game playing. But you are missing the deeper layer. Quiet dominance is not the absence of intelligence. It is intelligence plus emotional regulation plus strategic patience. It is the understanding that influence is not about what you know, but about how your presence affects the nervous systems of those around you. A truly dominant presence calms chaos. It does not add to it. When you walk into a room in crisis and your energy is steady, unreactive, certain, people unconsciously begin to organize around you. This is not something you can fake long term. It requires actual internal security. Let's examine the neuroscience briefly. Your brain has threat detection systems that operate faster than conscious thought. The amygdala processes social signals in milliseconds. When someone enters your environment displaying high energy, rapid speech, excessive explanation, your amygdala codes this as potential instability. Instability is dangerous in a hierarchy because it creates unpredictability. Conversely, when someone displays low reactivity, controlled speech, and comfortable silence, your amygdala reads this as security. Secure individuals are safe to follow. This happens entirely beneath conscious awareness, which is why people cannot articulate why they trust one person over another with equal credentials. This is also why anxiety destroys authority. You can be the most knowledgeable person in the room, but if your body language betrays nervousness, if your voice has that slight edge of needing approval, the primitive brain of everyone watching downgrades your status instantly. They do not decide to do this. It happens automatically. The person who seems unbothered by whether you agree, who can sit in disagreement without discomfort, who does not rush to fill awkward pauses, that person gets coded as higher status, regardless of what they actually know. Now we arrive at something darker. I gives you all the information you need to predict, counter, or dismiss them. But the person who reveals little, who speaks in principles rather than details, who maintains ambiguity about their full capacity, that person becomes psychologically larger than they are. You project onto them. You fill in the gaps with assumptions of competence. This is why the mysterious advisor is a trope in every culture's stories. Merlin does not explain magic to Arthur. He simply knows, and that knowing is never fully revealed. In modern organizational contexts, this manifests as the person who speaks last in meetings. They listen while others exhaust their arguments, reveal their biases, expose their insecurities. Then, when the room has talked itself into confusion, they offer a brief, clear perspective that seems to cut through everything. This appears wise, but it is often just strategic patience combined with the psychological advantage of contrast. After chaos, clarity seems profound. After noise, quiet seems authoritative. The person employing this strategy may not even be offering superior insight. They are simply offering it at the moment of maximum receptivity. You need to understand the difference between this and mere withholding. Some people are quiet because they have nothing to say. That is not dominance. That is absence. Quiet dominance requires that you actually have capacity, knowledge, skill, but you deploy it selectively. It is the controlled release of competence, not the hiding of incompetence. People can sense the difference, though they cannot always articulate it. The person with nothing to offer creates empty silence. The person with quiet dominance creates pregnant silence, heavy with potential. There is also a gender dimension here that cannot be ignored. Women who display loud intelligence face harsher social penalties than men for the same behavior. This is not fair, but it is observable across cultures. A woman who constantly demonstrates her knowledge is labeled difficult, aggressive, or threatening far more quickly than a male equivalent. Yet women who master quiet dominance, who lead through questions rather than statements, who guide rather than direct, often achieve influence that bypasses traditional gatekeeping. This is not an endorsement of the double standard. It is recognition that quiet dominance offers a pathway to power that does not trigger the specific threat responses that explicit female authority often does in still patriarchal structures. Consider the dynamic in negotiations. The person who speaks first about price almost always loses. The person who seems more comfortable with silence controls the frame. This is because silence creates psychological pressure, and your brain interprets silence as potential disapproval, as social danger. Most people cannot tolerate it and will fill the gap with concessions, explanations, justifications. The person who can sit in silence without discomfort is implicitly communicating that they do not need this deal, this approval, this relationship. And the moment you do not need something, you gain power over it. This extends to expertise itself. And the true expert often speaks less about their field than the intermediate student. This is partially the Dunning-Kruger effect in reverse. The more you know, the more you recognize complexity and uncertainty, so you make fewer absolute statements. But it is also strategic. The expert who maintains some mystery remains valuable. The expert who explains everything makes themselves redundant. You see this in consulting, in coaching, in any knowledge-based service. The person who gives you all the answers in the first meeting rarely gets hired. The person who gives you just enough to see the depth of what you do not know, they build dependency. There is a manipulation here that we should name directly. Quiet dominance can be weaponized by people with narcissistic or sociopathic tendencies. The strategic withholding of information, the cultivation of mystery, the refusal to explain, these can all be tools of emotional abuse when deployed without ethical constraint. The partner who remains maddeningly unavailable, the leader who keeps subordinates constantly guessing, the friend who maintains power through inscrutability, These are dark applications of the same principles. The difference is intent and context. Healthy quiet dominance creates stability and clarity. Toxic quiet dominance creates anxiety and dependency. You have likely encountered both types. On the leader whose calm presence makes you feel secure versus the leader whose silence feels like punishment. The friend whose discretion feels like trustworthiness versus the friend whose secrecy feels like exclusion. The mechanism is identical. The effect is opposite. This is why character matters more than technique. All social influence techniques are morally neutral. They become good or evil based on the aims they serve. Let's examine a contemporary example. Look at how the most effective tech CEOs communicate versus how most engineers communicate. The engineer wants to tell you how it works, all the technical elegance, the problem-solving process. The CEO tells you what it does for you in the simplest possible terms and stops. Steve Jobs was not the most technically knowledgeable person at Apple, not even close, but he understood that influence comes from clarity of vision, not complexity of explanation. He spoke in principles and metaphors. He left the details to others. This was not intellectual weakness. It was strategic communication. Meanwhile, the brilliant engineer who can explain every technical decision in detail rarely becomes the public face of the product, not because they lack knowledge, but because their relationship to that knowledge is different. They are proud of the complexity. The effective leader is proud of the simplicity they extracted from complexity. One wants you to appreciate the journey. The other wants you to enjoy the destination. Only one of these builds mass influence. This reveals something about how human attention works. Your attention is a limited resource, and you unconsciously allocate it based on perceived status. When someone is trying hard to gain your attention, you devalue them. When someone seems indifferent to whether you pay attention, you become more willing to give it. This is the psychology behind scarcity marketing, behind romantic attraction, behind charismatic authority. The person who is already abundant does not chase, and the person who does not chase becomes more valuable in your perception. You can see this in academic versus public intellectuals. The academic publishes peer-reviewed papers that few people read. The public intellectual tweets provocative ideas and builds massive audiences. Often, the academic knows more. But the public intellectual understands mimetic virality, emotional resonance, and strategic simplification. They know that one crystalline insight shared at the right moment beats a 1,000-page dissertation. This creates resentment in academic circles, but it does not change the reality of how ideas spread and who gains influence from them. There is also a temporal dimension to quiet dominance. It requires patience. Loud intelligence wants immediate recognition. It needs you to know right now how smart it is. Quiet dominance can wait. It knows that credibility builds through demonstrated results over time, not through verbal self-promotion. This is why the person constantly talking about what they are going to do rarely achieves as much as the person quietly doing it. Announcement is often a substitute for action. Silence is often the container for it. Think about the people you most respect professionally. Chances are, they did not tell you how competent they were. You discovered it by watching them handle situations others could not. You noticed their calm in crisis. You saw people defer to them naturally. The respect built slowly, through observation, not through declaration. This is the only form of status that is truly secure, because it is based on repeated evidence rather than accepted claims. Now consider what this means for your own development. If you have been operating from the loud intelligence model, trying to prove yourself through explanation, demonstration, and verbal assertion, you have been swimming upstream against millions of years of primate social wiring. This does not mean your intelligence is worthless. It means you have been deploying it in ways that undermine rather than enhance your social position. The shift is not about knowing less. It is about revealing less, speaking less, and allowing your competence to emerge through action rather than announcement. This requires genuine confidence, which is different from the performance of confidence. Genuine confidence allows you to be wrong sometimes. It does not need to defend every position. It can say, "I do not know," without status anxiety. The person who must always be right, who cannot tolerate correction, who needs to win every argument, that person is operating from insecurity no matter how intelligent they are. And insecurity is always loud. You will find that as you speak less, people listen more. As you explain less, they ask more questions. As you prove yourself less, they perceive more value. This feels counterintuitive because it is the opposite of how you were taught achievement works. You were told that visibility equals value, but in social hierarchies, scarcity equals value. The person who is always available, always explaining, always accessible, becomes furniture. The person who is selective with their time, their words, and their attention becomes a resource people compete for. This is not about arrogance or aloofness. It is about energetic efficiency. Every time you over-explain, you are expending social capital for diminishing returns. Every time you seek validation through demonstration of intelligence, you are inverting the status relationship. The high-status person does not need to prove anything. The fact that you are trying to prove something is itself evidence that you perceive yourself as lower status. Other people pick up on this instantly. Let's address the fear that comes with this. If you stop explaining yourself, stop demonstrating your intelligence, stop seeking approval, what if people do not recognize your value? This fear is legitimate, and sometimes it comes true. Some people will not recognize your value. But here is what you are missing. Those people were never going to grant you real authority anyway. The approval you get from constantly proving yourself is conditional, exhausting, and fragile. The respect you earn from quiet competence is resilient, self-reinforcing, and energizing. There is also a filtering function. When you stop performing your intelligence, you filter out relationships and opportunities based on ego validation. What remains are connections based on mutual respect and actual alignment. This smaller circle is more valuable than the larger one. 10 people who trust your judgment without needing constant proof are worth more than 100 people who need you to reestablish credibility in every interaction. The final and darkest truth is this: most people do not actually want to think for themselves. They want certainty in an uncertain world. And they want someone to follow who seems unshaken by the chaos that terrifies them. Loud intelligence offers information but not certainty. It shows them the complexity, which increases anxiety. Quiet dominance offers certainty through presence. It says, without words, "I have considered things you have not, and I am not worried, so you do not need to be either." This is what people are actually seeking when they look for leaders. This is why demagogues succeed. They offer simple certainty delivered with absolute confidence. It does not matter if the certainty is false. The emotional need is met. Now imagine that same certainty, but backed by actual competence, delivered with calm rather than aggression. That is quiet dominance at its most potent. It meets the emotional need for security while also offering genuine capability. This is rare, which is why when people encounter it, they often become loyal beyond reason. You have the capacity to develop this, but it requires confronting your relationship with validation. You must become comfortable with people misunderstanding you, with people underestimating you, with people not immediately recognizing your value. This comfort cannot be faked. It must be real, which means it must be built on genuine self-knowledge and internal security. The person who knows what they are capable of does not need external confirmation, and they can afford to be patient while others figure it out. Start by speaking half as much in meetings. Notice what happens. Notice the increase in attention when you do speak. Notice how people begin to seek your input rather than you offering it. Start allowing silence to exist in conversations without rushing to fill it. Watch how others reveal themselves in that silence. Start saying, "I will think about that," instead of immediately answering every question. Notice how this increases rather than decreases your perceived expertise. These are not manipulations if they are aligned with genuine depth. They are simply the optimal expression of competence in a social species that makes hierarchical decisions largely through subconscious emotional processing rather than conscious logical evaluation. You are not tricking anyone. You are communicating in the language that human nervous systems actually speak, which is the language of regulated presence, not verbal persuasion. The person who masters this becomes dangerous in the best sense. They can enter any room and within minutes understand the true power structure beneath the official hierarchy. They know who actually makes decisions versus who has titles. They know which battles to fight and which to let go. They accumulate influence steadily, almost invisibly, until one day people realize this person has become essential and no one can quite explain when it happened. This is how quiet dominance always outranks loud intelligence. And if you have watched carefully, you will recognize that everything worth knowing has already been shown to you through observation. Now it is simply a matter of whether you will align your behavior with what you already know to be true and let your presence do the work your words have been failing to accomplish.